Conference realignment is always in the news, so we're back on the Big Mountain to keep you guys updated. And I have a very special guest here on the Big Mountain, Joe, the Sauce Hedberg. Welcome to the Big Mountain.
Thanks for having me, JY. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you giving me some time. A lot's been going on here with Oregon State, a lot of turbulent time over the last 2 or so years with everything that went on with the PAC and then kind of the scheduling agreement with the Mountain West. And of course, now we've got the PAC rebuild and memberships and oh, so much we can talk about. But I want to hear from you, just the boots on the ground, a guy that does have the sauces, if you will. What is the feeling right now, just overall with Oregon State athletics and kind of where things are at, moving forward in this PAC rebuild?
With Oregon State athletics, I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of fans that want to burn it to the ground and just given the state of the football season. However, there have been several positives with Oregon State athletics overall. The women's indoor track and field team, I believe it was their indoor track and field team or track and field team, won a conference title. And the men's soccer team are playing for the WCC title on Friday night against San Diego. They don't have to win the game. They just have to draw. So there's a possibility to see another WCC title go Oregon State's way. They won a few last year, as well as the Pac-12 title in wrestling last year. So there are some positives. Men's basketball is off to a 2-0 start, which is good. The women, maybe we'll see a women's team tonight be able to take out Air Force the same way the gymnastics team did last year. So at least some of the athletes at Oregon State can beat a service academy. So, but right now the feel around football is not great, especially after the Sam Houston loss this weekend. There's a lot of people blaming Scott Barnes. I've been slightly frustrated with him. I've talked to some people, quite a few of the people that are donors that still support Scott Barnes. And that is something that he still needs. Given the hand that Oregon State and to, similar extent, Washington State was dealt a few years ago, it's been kind of a mess, and it hasn't been the easiest last couple seasons for football for Oregon State, to say the least. I think in some senses when they hired Trent Bray, I think, start off by saying this. I think that Scott Barnes' hire of Trent Bray was a double-edged sword. And the reason being for that is if he did not hire Trent Bray, the fan base would have flipped and been mad. He did hire Trent Bray, which made players, fans, and coaches happy with that. So when it didn't go as well as people hoped it would go, now it's, oh, Scott Barnes made this mistake. Why did he do this? But I've said it in the past, hey, I was fully supportive of this. I donated my $44 or whatever I donated to the Oregon State NIL $1 million campaign, where someone was going to match the $1 million raised to Oregon State NIL. And people were donating money to hire Trent Bray as the next coach. And then people started donating money to keep Aiden Childs as the quarterback. We got the head coach. We didn't necessarily keep the quarterback. But, it's for people to, turn on Bray. And I was unimpressed with the body of work. I thought last year when they beat Washington State at the end of the game and they were competitive against Boise State, that, hey, this team's turning the corner. We got healthier players back. And then when they got Malik Murphy in the transfer portal, I thought, okay, and like many others, this is going to be a big season. We're going to win at least 9 games, 8 or 9 games. And it didn't go that way. And so a lot of people put that blame on Scott Barnes for hiring Trent Bray. Some names that have popped up recently with the coaching search in the first go around was Paul Chryst was a finalist, as he is right now. But Paul Chryst would not commit to hiring Trent Bray as the DC and said he would interview him because Trent Bray was a player at Oregon State the last time Paul Chryst was an offensive coordinator. And he said he'd give him an interview, but he would not guarantee on hiring him. And that's when they hired Trent Bray. Another person that I've heard was also linked to the Oregon State job was Arizona's coach, Brent Brennan. And allegedly, Brent Brennan had agreed to hire Trent Bray as the DC at one point, but then took the Arizona job. But I don't know. That's what I was told, but looking at some of the timelines that somebody pointed out to me, that may not match up. So, but that option was there from what I've heard. So overall, Oregon State football's not in a good place. I've seen some Coug fans, some Beaver fans, and a few new Pac fans of other universities say that this 2 years, in a sense, really didn't matter to Oregon State and Washington State. And I think it did matter, because if you brought in a guy like Paul Chryst to take over the program, you could have laid a foundation and used these 2 years to build. And that way, by year 3, you're competing, and competing for the Pac-12 title. Now you're going to have, at least Oregon State is going to have a new head coach. Colorado State's going to have a new head coach, and Colorado State's eyeing some of the same people that Oregon State's eyeing. So it's a race in some senses.
Yeah.
I think GJ Kinney's still going to be there. I joked around and said that as soon as GJ Kinney's name was getting floated around for the Oklahoma State job, they purposely started tanking. And again, I'm just joking about that, but it's Texas State's been in games. The defense is just giving stuff up lately. And sorry to throw some strays at Texas State's way, but I've been watching them and I'm just like, oh, come on, guys. So, but with the hiring committee for the head coaching job at Oregon State, I like who they've picked. Mike Riley's on the college football playoff committee, so he's a guy that's locked in. Yeah. Brandon Cooks is actually still in the NFL and still, involved with Oregon State, and he's been a known critic of Scott Barnes. Yeah. So people that have been critical of him are on this committee to bring somebody in. So we'll see what happens with that. I've been sort of doing a mock my top 3 candidates in no particular order, and it changes week to week.
Yeah.
Someone told me that Jim Moore of UConn had expressed interest with his agent. And I think that would be an excellent hire. Some people disagree with me, but he had a winning record at UCLA. He won a division title in the Pac-12 with UCLA, and he has a winning record currently at UConn.
Right.
And it looks like the Huskies are going to have a 10-win season after beating Duke this weekend. So I don't see why you wouldn't want him as a coach, because sure, he had some two bad years at UCLA, and one was the 2016 season. Their UCLA team had a ton of injuries and a little bit of changeover. Yeah. And then they fired him with 2 or 3 games left in 2017. And he also, the one thing people don't talk about is while he was at UCLA, he beat USC 3 times in 5 years. Like, who doesn't want to take three wins in 5 years over your rival? Like, come on. So, I still think Brett Vegan is going to be one of the top choices, and Paul Chryst is out there, and who knows who else is going to be involved. I know people have talked about Nick Rolovich. I still think you can give Brian Harsin a shot. He went to 5 Mountain West title games and won 3 of them in his 5 years at Boise State. He won a Fiesta Bowl. So I don't know why he's not getting as much traction in the head coaching search. I think he could be a candidate at other programs, but I don't know why his name's not popping up for Oregon State, at least.
Well, I appreciate all that. You laid it out perfectly. A couple of things I would like to just go back and maybe dig into a little bit more. I do think it's really important that we kind of remind everyone of the history of where Oregon State and A.D. Barnes has been and what they've had to try to maneuver through a lot of unknowns over the past 24 or so months. And I know there's been people over the years that have had their issues, like any AD at any university. I don't think any athletic director is 100% loved in everything, all the decisions that they make. And of course, the longer an AD is there, the more people question the decisions that are being made. And so I think it's very important, and we followed it very closely back the end of 23 and early 24, when all of that was going on, the leadership of both the Beavs and the Cougs, from the president to the ADs to kind of what they had to deal with. I thought they handled it about as well as anybody could back in those times. And even if you take a look back to 12 weeks ago, you mentioned how everybody was kind of on board for the most part that Trent Bray hire, and it was exactly like you said. The players were interested, the donors were interested, the fans were interested. He's still our guy, and all of that kind of stuff. Of course, everybody forgets a lot of that history when you have a losing season, and you maybe lose to a team in Sam Houston that, of course, that was after Trent Bray. But again, the season just kind of unraveling. And so they kind of forget everything that transpired over the last 18 months and what that meant back 12 months ago. So I guess all of that to be said, I want to focus a little bit more on AD Barnes, and just kind of, you see some of these salacious type of tweets, and social media is just a cesspool to begin with. But I want you to maybe help me set the record straight on at least your opinion of, yes, maybe there's some donors that are upset. You kind of hit on that a little bit ago, that it's not all donors want to try and help the university. Like, what do you think the reality is of the situation with where donors are at, where the president and AD are at, and trying to work together to move things forward?
So when he took the job in, I want to say like 2016 or 2017, he had an uphill battle. I want to say he was hired in 20, or like spring of 2017, because that's when Gary Anderson resigned in the fall of 2017 after they got blown out by USC. And so you had Corey Hall come in and take over as interim. And then he in turn, hired Jonathan Smith. And when Jonathan Smith came in with that press conference, everything was laid out for the fan base. And I think people often forget that aspect of it, because Jonathan Smith, we knew we were the rock bottom team in the country. And he said, we can't build this thing overnight. It's going to take time. Yeah. And fans knew we needed time to build that. 2018, not the greatest, but that comeback win in Colorado was awesome. They were a play away from being bowl eligible ahead of schedule in 2019. I think 2020 threw a wrench in the plans. Some people say you don't count the 2020 season, but my counterpoint to that is, if the 2020 season does not count, then maybe our win against Oregon shouldn't count, but we want to count that. So that season has to count in my book.
Yeah.
So, that there's that aspect of it. And then in 2021, they turned the corner. They beat USC in the Coliseum for the first time since the 60s. They finished with a 7-6 record. And then they, 2022, 10-win season. And then, the conference falls apart. Right. But I think Scott Barnes has navigated that since the fall apart quite well. And him and, the leadership at Oregon State as well as Washington State has had turbulent waters to navigate, with the scheduling agreement with the Mountain West, to an independent schedule, to things of that nature. And I agree with the sentiment. Nobody has had it harder than them. And nobody else in the country has had to go through what those two teams have had to go through. But I think that there's frustration built because of this sentiment going back to last year. There are some of those Mountain West teams we should have beaten. And again, I agree with that. We should have beaten them. However, tons of injuries hampered the Beavs last year.
Right.
Some bad portaling when it's come to a few key positions like quarterback. So we didn't have a true quarterback. Jabari Johnson, very raw, very talented, as we can see.
Yeah.
The way that he's performed so far, definitely room for improvement in that area. So Oregon State, really didn't have a quarterback to play with. Tons of injuries. I mean, going back to the Nevada game, they had 19 players out that game. When our fourth tight end is playing as a defensive end that game, you're going to struggle, and I don't want to use the injuries as an excuse, but when the players did get healthy, We saw them compete and beat Washington State. We saw them compete for the most part against Boise State because that game was closer than a lot of people thought it should be.
Yeah.
So there was the sentiment that they turned the corner. And then this year, with the money invested in quarterback, the money invested in tight ends, the money invested on some of the defensive side, expectations were through the roof.
Yeah.
And of course, now that the head coach is gone, now it's the AD's fault for everything. So
yeah.
That's where it's at. And again, I think that there is positivity ahead. It all depends on who gets hired. And I said it maybe a week or two ago that I don't think Scott Barnes makes it through the rest of this contract that he signed, I think, last year.
Okay.
And I think they finish getting the TV deal done. I think they figure out scheduling and potential football only members for next year, or if by a miracle for next year, or 2027. Maybe add a new member for football only, who knows? And then once everything is set, TV deal's done, everything's established, I think he relinquishes the AD and goes into some form of advisory role or just retires overall. Because he had that health scare in 2023 where he almost died at Fresno. So, I think he's just pushing it as far as he can to get Oregon State in a good position. I think his heart and his head are in the right place. And I hope people understand.
Well, that's a great parlay into kind of where I wanted to head to next. And I do want to just kind of watch the clock here. But I want to talk about the PAC in general. And then I think there's a couple other things we want to hit on. You mentioned revenue generation, media valuations, and media deals. And that plays a large piece into an AD and what they can and can't do with whatever revenue they have to use with an athletic department. So I'd like to shift gear to the PAC. Just, you kind of mentioned membership a little bit. You talked about media deals. I'd like to hear from you, being an Oregon State fan and follower. Like, where are you at right now in comfortability of where the PAC is at with their rebuild, with their members, and where they're headed with a media deal?
Overall, I'm satisfied with the membership. I think that, I wish that some of the current members have performed better on the field, not just Oregon State. I mean, Washington State has a new coach, but we hit on Texas State earlier. I wish that, they've lost some close games. Colorado State's a little surprising because I thought, if Colorado State could go through and, upset Boise State or UNLV, they were in the Mountain West title game potentially. But that didn't pan out. But overall, I'm happy with where we're at. I think next year's basketball is going to be really good with the PAC. Another ad people don't talk about a lot is the Dallas Baptist for baseball. Like, that's such a huge ad. And I had wanted that, and I was like, there's only one Division I school or Division I sport that they play, and it's baseball. Like, you got to go get them. So I think that, there's the talk St. Mary's is in the holding pattern. I've also heard, and I've also heard counterpoints to this, and I said something on Saturday that, UTSA is at an arm's length away right now. I don't know how possible it is. I've heard a San Antonio beat writer said that there's absolutely no shot that they go in. And so, I've, again, mixed things. Scheduling wise, Merton Hanks said something a couple weeks ago, I can't remember if it was via text to Wilner or Canzano, but basically said that we're working hard to get to 8 conference games. So it tells me that they're still trying to look for a potential football only member, or try to work on getting, if they have to do a double game like Oregon State and Washington State are doing this year.
Yeah.
Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Who knows how that's going to work out. But the one thing that in regards to scheduling is Sauce out of the SEC. He also covers the Sun Belt. Has informed me that currently the Jacksonville State at Auburn game next year is postponed. No announcement has officially been made yet, but they're working to reschedule that for a future date because the SEC and ACC are going to 9 conference games in 2026. So there's quite a few Sun Belt teams and potentially Conference USA members who are going to have a lot of open games with losing those SEC and ACC games. So that's why there's the talk of a scheduling agreement, or do something informal for Christ's sakes.
Yeah.
But working with the Sun Belt or Conference USA, because the one thing that there's a Collegiate Athletics, and now I feel bad because I can't remember the handle. They just did an excellent video
Okay.
on all the open scheduling dates, and I can get that to you. I'll DM that to you because I feel bad that I butchered it, but the person that runs that account did an excellent YouTube video on potential open scheduling. And the one thing when I went through all the openings was that Louisiana Tech, they have 2 non-conference games, but they're playing against Sun Belt opponents, and they're going to be in the Sun Belt next year. So they're likely going to have potentially 2 openings.
Right.
So, TCU still has an opening, but the one thing I pointed out in a direct message with them is that TCU doesn't have an FCS scheduled opponent yet. And usually they do play an FCS school.
Yeah.
So some of the openings are due to no FCS games being scheduled by those programs, but excellent breakdown that they did. So and media deal wise, I'm still confident that they can get the 10 to 12 million, could be as high as 14 million. But the one thing that the Pac-12 can use to its advantage, and we truly won't know the numbers of it, is the Pac-12 enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
We know Cal's using it. We know Arizona's using it. We know the NBA has licensed it. I think Major League Baseball has licensed them as well to broadcast games. So I know that whatever money and revenue they're generating from that is going to be included with that media cost or that media deal. So those numbers could be inflated to include future projections of what they're going to do for that. And, there's really no telling what it could be. So I think that 10 to 12 would be pretty solid given what's going on. With everything in regards to the Pac-12.
That's good. I appreciate those chunks. And I'll give a shout out to Will, the Collegiate Athletic Advocate. And I believe that's who you're referring to there. I'll link his information in the description. We've had contact with him as well. So I'll have to check. I did not see that, but I'll make sure I check out that episode regarding the scheduling and whatnot. The other thing I wanted to just bring up, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up here. But I wanted to just get your take on the lawsuits. There's a lot of spin out there, and what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, who's ahead, who's behind. Anything with the lawsuits that you wanted to throw out?
Well, they just dropped some updated information shortly before we got on, so I haven't reviewed all of that yet. The only thing, and you and I have talked about this in DMs, and I think I've even posted this, is that I feel like this is a 50-50 situation between the conferences. It's going to come down to what's found in discovery and which legal team is better. The only thing that I brought up, and I don't think anyone engaged me on it, is the talk of how the 5 outgoing Mountain West members worked to keep the overall agreement at $14 million. And to my point on that was, if the 5 of them didn't say keep it at 14, how much would the Mountain West have charged for that scheduling agreement? Because as we found out in the discussions for 2025, the Mountain West wanted to charge upwards of $31 million for a scheduling agreement. So I don't know, if, maybe those 5 helped out with that couple extra million per school, or was it 1.3 million per school, or how high they would have gone. So I'm not saying that Oregon State and Washington State were hamstrung into being forced to do anything, but I think that in that sense, that's my only question, is how far would they have gone up to try and charge for the scheduling agreement before those 5 said 14 million, cap it. That's it.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that's my only take on some of the stuff that's come out. I still need to do some in-depth research on everything. It's just been a very busy time in with my other outside job. So
Oh, I get that. Steve and I have that as well. We do this for fun on the side, but I'll tell you, with everything that's going on, it can take most of your day if you let it. So I get that. There's plenty of things I'd love to be able to dive into a lot deeper than we just have the time to do. And with that, Joe, I want to thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you kind of giving us really kind of the feel for where things are at with Oregon State. Of course, as we said, not the season in football that they wanted, but other sports having very good success. And as they kind of get to their new reality of the new pack, the rebuilt pack, I think better times are ahead for the Beavers. So thanks so much for joining me.
yeah, no problem. I'd love to do it again when we both have some time, and I trust that Scott Barnes can make the correct decision here. And I hope that people can be inspired to, donate again to the NIL collective after all that other stuff that came out with it. So,
Appreciate that. Well, hey, I thank you all for watching this episode. As you guys know, we follow the pack. We deep dive the Mountain West and the Big Ten. Again, a big thank you to Joe. Make sure you smash that like button on the way out. Subscribe if you like our content, and we'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.